Hello and welcome. This is Lex from the UM6B School of Collective Intelligence and Sciences Po Paris. And today we are going to look at theory of change, a method of leadership and building campaigns that will help you create a strategy for systemic change. I often hear conversations something like this. Oh, God, this situation is outrageous. We have to do something about it. I agree. Okay, let's plan a protest. Great. How will that help? Not sure, but we're really good at protests. I hear energy and passion and a sense of injustice and a sense of urgency to take action, but not a sense of strategy and what will connect that action to the longer term impact that we want. It makes me think of this famous episode from the cartoon South Park, where the children discover a set of gnomes living underground, and they have this idea they're going to make a lot of money, and their first step is to collect everyone's underwear. And phase two, they don't know. They don't know what's going to happen in phase two, but they're going to get everyone's underwear, and it's going to make them a lot of money. So this, I think, is a little bit of the problem with a lot of advocacy campaigns where people feel pressure to act, to take action, do something quickly, even if they aren't totally sure how that action will fit into the bigger picture. And a second problem can be that we have something of an idea about the impact that we want, but it's not totally clear either. We sort of assume that everyone knows what we want is justice or equality or for everyone to have an opportunity. We think that it's obvious sometimes, where it's not totally obvious what is that impact and how we might measure it and know that we've achieved it. And this lack of clarity sometimes leads us to plan events and actions based on what is easy to do, that's something that's in front of us that we know how to do, or that we've done before, and not on how we can effectively create pressure on the system in the right way at the right time to get us closer to that world that we can imagine. So a theory of change is a visual model that links short-term actions with long-term impact. It's a model that shows how you and your team and your movement plan to get from here to there. It's something that we visualize. This helps us get the collective intelligence of the room into one place, into something that we can save and improve, this visual map of our theory of change. And it's something that we explain, that we use to tell stories, to mobilize others about how they can join our campaign. So I'll give an example. This is one of the most famous campaigns in American history that was one of the early victories in the American civil rights movement for equal rights for African Americans. So this is Joanne Robinson of the Women's Political Council in Montgomery, Alabama. She was a professor in this segregated city at the time, and she was one of the lead organizers of this campaign. On the night that Rosa Parks is arrested in Montgomery, and you might know about this campaign and you might have heard the name Rosa Parks, Joanne Robinson, head of the Women's Political Council, gets a call from the lawyer who was representing these people who had been arrested on the bus system, Fred Gray, saying, okay, now we have a woman, very, very likable, sympathetic victim of this racist law. Are you ready? Meaning, are you ready to take action and launch a boycott? They talked about doing a boycott for several years, but they'd been missing the right victim of the system that they could build this boycott around. They'd already mapped out a system of distributing information on how this boycott could work, how to get lots of information to the tens of thousands of African Americans in the city. So they take quick action. Joanne and two of her students go to the college printer. They print out 17,500 sheets of paper cut into thirds so that they had enough to distribute to each of the 45,000 black citizens of Montgomery. On the following Monday, just 3 days later, the first work day, after the boycott is called, tens of thousands of black citizens of this city stay off the city buses. So the boycott is launched on the Monday, and the first day of the boycott is a success. The question is, what's their theory of change? How is this short-term action, keeping people off the buses, how is that going to lead to a better city, a city that's more fair and that treats them more fairly? So we can map this logic that was behind the boycott. What they wanted was fair treatment, right? And there are ways you can measure that the number of arrests of people who were sitting in the quote unquote white section of the bus, the well-being of African American citizens. That's something that could be measured in surveys or in stories. So this idea of fair treatment, while it's an abstract idea of the society they want, it's something that's measurable, that they could measure to see if they're making progress. And so what they thought would be necessary to produce that impact would be some kind of negotiated agreement with the leaders of the city, all of whom were white, that the policy would be changed. The policy involving the buses that separated the black people and the white people and would have to be changed. And that could only be changed if the city leaders agreed to change it. So how would they create pressure on those city leaders so that they would negotiate a change in the policy? Well, this is where they reasoned that they don't have a lot of political power, but they have economic power. The black people pay to use the buses. There are tens of thousands of them. They use the buses every day. And if they stay off the buses, that withholds the income that the city is counting on to run the bus system. That creates pressure. So this was the kind of core reasoning about why a boycott would be an effective way of putting pressure on the system. Key to this strategy, to winning sympathy among perhaps moderates in the community, in the white community, that they would need in order to increase that pressure, would be nonviolence, right? They could not seem like this was a violent revolution against the system or that people were being threatened or harassed. Rather, that a boycott would give the African American community the moral high ground. The local press and then, of course, the regional and national press would cover this boycott as a struggle for justice as opposed to a criminal activity against the system. And they wanted to keep communication open with the city leaders. They said if we can keep communication open between the Women's Political Council, the NAACP, which is the civil rights organization, and the mayor and the police commissioner and the transportation commissioner of the city, that this would at least send the message that a negotiation is possible. And so if the pressure was big enough, if they kept the moral high ground, that this would lead to this outcome of a negotiated settlement. So you can see here, this was their theory of how a boycott, done in the right way, with the lines of communication open, would lead finally to the impact that they wanted. Now, finally, they needed to know that certain conditions were satisfied. So first, obviously, the press needed to be free. The press needed to be giving open and honest coverage of what they were doing in order for them to gain that sympathy. They needed to be able to count on a fair court system so that the police couldn't just lock up all of the black leaders of the campaign and put and crack down on the boycott. And they needed some kind of limits to white violence against them. They knew that there was always the risk of violence, of physical violence against them, but they were counting on that this would be limited enough that the African American community would be able to keep their courage and stay off the buses. And they also needed some conditions of their own internal to the campaign, the sense of their moral. The righteousness of what they were doing, the certainty that yes, this was going to be a cost, but it was worth paying that cost because their dignity was at stake. They needed to be able to create alternatives so that people could get to work, whether that was through carpooling or walking, and they needed a way of keeping information flowing among the black community so that if there were changes in the strategy, that could be executed in a collective way. So you see here, this is a theory of change. It's a theory of what are the conditions that need to be in place in order for us to act, which actions are the most likely to produce the immediate effects that we need, that together create an outcome, a specific win, a specific victory, in this case a negotiated settlement with the city leaders, that gets us closer to that impact that we want, this positive view of society that would make us all better off. So you see, this is the schema. This is the framework you can use to build your theory of change, right? We begin by looking at impact, by trying to clarify what it is that we're trying to create in the world. How would we measure that, right? How do we define it in one sentence, and how do we measure our progress towards that impact? And then we go back to the beginning, right, and say, well, what are the activities we think are going to get us there? And then we test, well, in the best case scenario, what would that activity produce? What would action A produce? So action A produces an output. How do we measure that output? How do the different outputs together achieve middle-term outcomes, either outcomes for individuals that we want to empower, or outcomes in terms of changes in behaviors, changes in laws, changes in budgets? Those are the kind of intermediate results that our outputs, the outputs of our activities should lead us toward. And then finally, we think about what are the drivers, what are the conditions that both externally, outside of our control, and internally, in our control, that allow for those actions to take place. So here you have in one image the basis of a strategy. Once you have your theory of change, you can create a strategic plan of when to take action and how. And of course, in order for that strategic plan to work, you need the narratives that are inspiring and that build solidarity and momentum. And you need a map. You need maps of the actors and processes so that you take the right action at the right time. Okay, in our next video, we're going to talk about how to explain our theory of change. But just to summarize why a theory of change is so important, the first is about priorities. It lets us focus on actions that are most likely to maximize our impact. A theory of change allows us to test and learn to make our strategy smarter and smarter over time. And finally, it allows us to be credible, allows us to help to convince and mobilize new members of our team and our movement, new allies in the political ecosystem, and of course, help mobilize sources of funding. So this is why we need to do a theory of change. In our next video, we're going to look at how we can explain that theory of change in the most convincing way.